Welcome to the show today. I'm Sharla Mize, licensed professional clinical counselor. I'm going to be interviewing therapists and practitioners and different people that I think can contribute to our toolbox for therapists and other providers to help our clients heal, to work in the community, to advocate. Whatever I want to bring to the show, I will, but I'm starting with a friend and colleague, Jenna Longmire. She's a licensed psychotherapist, a musician, a singer-songwriter, a healer, a priestess mentor, a soul guide, and the founder of Tree of Life Temple and Mystery School. She is now virtual. She has spent her life seeking the ways of the great mystery and the source of human suffering. She writes about the divine feminine and spiritual awakening in her songs, her memoir, The Mystery School Curriculum. She has studied energetic, shamanic, and somatic healing modalities and explored the divine feminine and feminist spirituality for over 25 years. After spending many years in private practice as a healer and psychotherapist, she is ready to share her healing medicine and sacred roots music to a world that is in crisis. Welcome, Jenna.
Thank you, Sharla.
I definitely have a personal connection with Jenna. Her description of what she does has touched so many people, so many women that she's called into circle, and clients of hers that she's helped with the feminine archetype, the goddess, the mother archetype. And so I know personally that she is a healer and a soul guide because I've experienced that for myself. So today we wanted to talk about bringing that mother archetype, that goddess imagery into the therapy room for our clients who have childhood developmental trauma, who have attachment wounds. And I had first heard of doing that specifically. I'd experienced learning about the feminine archetypes through the feminist lens with Jenna as a teacher, but then read Mother Hunger and realized that we could actually bring this into the therapy room for our clients who didn't have that mother, didn't have that caregiver that they could find attunement with, and as a result, struggle in having healthy relationships no matter their age as they grow. And Jen and I presented on that at the Tennessee Licensed Professional Counselors Association last year, and we're continuing our work. We've done one virtual training and we plan on doing more and getting more in depth with it. But I wanted to start off that next endeavor with this podcast so we could let therapists and providers know that there are resources that we weren't taught in graduate school that are very important for our clients. Are you ready to get started?
I'm just grateful that you're trailblazing this topic because I mean, there may be other people talking about it, but I haven't seen it in this
Yeah.
specific way with therapists. Yeah.
And we've had a really positive response from therapists who have been in our trainings, just because it's not provided anywhere else. So, when you are working with a client who is actively trying to recover from attachment wounds specific to their mother or caregiver, how do you introduce the mother archetype to them? How do you bring that into the room?
Well, I first assess where they are with that archetype because it's surprising how many clients maybe don't have a lot of positive associations with the mother archetype, particularly if they come from, an abusive mother figure. So I will start with where they're at and ask them, what does mother mean to you when I say that word? Or when you think of a mother archetype, what does that bring up for you? So I try to find out where they're at with that. Is it more of a shadow aspect of the mother, or is it more nurturing? And then I'll find out kind of what they need, what's missing for them. What are they looking
Yeah.
for? But I find out a lot about where they're at just by what comes up for them. And so then we kind of start to look at, okay, well, what do they associate with it from their life? And what is their ideal mother archetype? So we got to start with where they're at, and then we start to build
Yeah.
where we're headed.
The reality and then the idea of what they would like and what they need, right?
Yes, and they may not know that. That's the other thing.
Hmm.
I might actually have to give them that information like, oh, well, here's an example of a mother archetype that has these traits, nurturing, protecting.
So you brought up something I want to ask about. What if the archetype for them of the mother is the shadow? What do you do then when you realize that that's the case?
We call it out, we say, this is what you had. Kind of depends too on if it was an overtly abusive situation or it was more covert, like neglect or withholding love. Because some clients may not even realize what they've missed, if or withholding. They may not even be conscious. Like, oh, I need this. This is something I maybe should look at incorporating into my own development. So yeah, it kind of depends on again where the client is starting from.
I would assume that if they have an avoidant or ambivalent attachment style, that they are going to be a little resistant to, I obviously don't need a mother because I raised myself, or I got to where I am without the mother. So why would I need to bring in an archetype or an image of mother?
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost just a blank space for them. Like they're just kind of not even really sure what to
Yeah.
do.
Interesting. So then when you start bringing in the images, do you start with images? Do you start with stories? Give me an example, like a specific mother archetype that you would bring in and discuss with the client.
If they are open to going there, then I might still try to get them to come up with something because I hate to introduce something that like say Kuan Yin works for me. She's a Chinese goddess of mercy and compassion. So to try to just introduce Kuan Yin as an archetype to someone that might not resonate with them, I would probably still maybe even go for like, okay, what about nature? What about an animal? What about an element, a landscape, even, really try
Mm.
if there's anything at all that they can connect with nurture, feeling safe, cared for. And even like characters, characters in movies, television, because they can be very iconic and have those traits. There could be, I know for me, Mr. Rogers was like a maternal figure for me, and that's not even a female.
Anybody who kind of, or object even, because it's literally going back to object relations that resembles nurturance and care and strength, even possibly, because we want a parent who's strong enough to protect us. And for some people, that's the wound. The mother was not protective.
I had a client, and I tried to find something for her as a resource, and it ended up being the moon.
Interesting. I like the moon and the sun for these kinds of exercises because they're permanent. The sun always rises, right? The moon always has a cycle. We haven't lost either one of those for millennia. So they're a good resource. The earth, right? The earth could be a good resource. Like you said, a landscape. It could be even the whole earth, and then maybe even bring in Gaia into that scenario.
They can connect with nature, earth, a tree, then you could maybe segue into Gaia, into the tree of life, a Shara, tree goddess. I just like to find a point where they can resonate, they have some sort of a connection to.
Do you have books? Do you have images that you use or something online that you use for resources to help them through this process?
Nothing specifically. I'm working on finishing up the curriculum that I'm working on right now. So
Hmm.
we'll have a lot of this stuff coming forward because I recognize the need. I haven't found great resources for something this specific. I feel like people could just kind of piece it together. So I would like to bring some of this together in a format where you could maybe guide a client to a resource like that, where there's a lot there that they could choose from,
Okay.
rather
Yeah.
than, hey, does this resonate? Does this resonate? Like send them
Yeah.
somewhere.
I know you had a Pinterest that you had developed where that you would share in Circle when you were educating us on the divine feminine. And so I'm imagining something like that, where, like if you're looking for a nurturing archetype, you would look under this tab. If you're looking for a fierce mother, you're looking under this tab.
That is true. That's a good resource of images, and then you kind of have to do your own research down the rabbit,
Yeah.
whatever. And they do have like a reference book of goddesses, heroines. That's Patricia Monahan.
We could put at the bottom of the podcast a list of resources for them. So we'll do
Mhm.
that because there are plenty of books, and we happen to be living in an age where, as far as I know, there is, because I'm newer to this kind of work and spiritual practice of earth-based and divine feminine-based kind of spiritual practice. And so maybe it's because I'm new, I'm seeing it more, but I feel like because of the times that we're in, I'm definitely seeing more people coming out, and including therapists as Wiccan or pagan, or looking into the divine feminine, women meeting in circles. There seems to be a resurgence of this. It's a good time to have more resources. Like, definitely online, we could find a lot more about the specific different archetypes.
That was one of the things I was thinking of in terms of finding a lineage that you connect to. It could be your own ancestral lineage. For me, it would be Celtic and Nordic. So, like, you could go back to your own ancestral lineage and research those deities to see if you connect with them. But maybe you don't. Maybe you're really into yoga and the chakras and studying the Vedic philosophies, and you want to study the Hindu goddesses. So you get into Durga, Kali, Shakti, all of the Hindu.
Hmm.
Much juiciness in every lineage. There's goddesses in every, pretty much you follow any lineage you want to, you far back enough.
I love it because we can use these tools for our own growth, our own information, but also to share with our clients to help them in this process. Here's my question now. So once you introduce that, how do you work with that in the therapy session? And how do you teach the client how to work with that, how to internalize that mother archetype?
With attachment wounding, it's important to have what I would call, something bigger, the spiritual divine mother. It's the therapeutic relationship sometimes. The client may be relying on the therapist to kind of give them a sense of what it feels like to have a nurturing presence, whether you're a female or a male therapist, it doesn't matter. But to have that type of presence, that may be their first experience of it, teaching them it's okay to rely on something that's bigger than you, that's outside of you, that's feeling like it's stabilizing for you or grounding for you at this moment. However, the goal is to internalize that. That's why I feel like it wouldn't work to bring in something too soon. Like we might have to, and I might be skipping ahead here, but not going to get back past those defenses until you start working with those defenses first. Answer your question. If we're not still working on the defenses, which in most cases we are doing that for quite some time, and they're just sort of trusting the therapist that this is going to work. And usually once they realize that they're not their defenses, because they sort of like get identified with that, it's like, well, I'm just this tough,
Yeah.
person not going to
Mhm.
let anyone in. And I can identify with the warrior goddess maybe, but not this mothery thing. So you got to kind of work with them where they're at and like do the warrior goddess thing with them for a while. When they're able to, I think, be vulnerable enough to let that in, and they experience, oh, that self-esteem around, I am loved by
Yeah.
this energy or this whatever it is I'm attaching to as the mother figure, the mother energy.
Yeah. Getting to that point where they can accept that there is a higher being, energy, power that loves them unconditionally in the way that a parent was supposed to do, which is heart opening, right? Like, definitely, if they've been defensive and they get to that point, they have softened and they've opened their heart a little bit to that idea. And then, how do you help them to internalize that and then secure the internal mother as their own? So, which is what would, developmentally, when we're born and we have that attunement from that parent, that for a while, that parent's voice becomes our internal voice until we develop further and differentiate and have our own voice. But that voice would not be possible if it weren't for the attunement of our parent, right? Like, so it's like an organic growth, like the fruit of the tree, right? It's of the tree, but it's different. And then in the therapy practice, we want our clients to grow to that point where maybe for a while they hear our voice in their heads. And then eventually we want them to get to the point where they have an internalized voice that comes from a place of wisdom and love. So, how do we help them along in that process, moving from an archetypal mother to self? Does that make sense? I said a lot of words there.
Yeah, this is a pretty lengthy process that we keep spiraling around and around. I'm trying to think of, it's so hard to answer in a linear way sometimes. We're talking about first being able to receive this nurturing and love from something outside of ourselves that gives
Hmm.
enough self-worth that we can then do that for ourselves. If we attach to something outside ourselves, then what happens if that goes away? Now, if it is a true devotional, someone who truly it's authentic for them to completely turn this over to a power greater than them, if that feels true for them, then that works for those people. We have a lot of people that consider themselves atheist or with whom nothing really outside of them feels safe. So with those people, then we definitely are really focusing on getting them to the point where they can develop a relationship with their wounded self, the unmothered,
Hmm.
and then be able to hold space for that without like collapsing into that identity.
So they might be resistant to a divine feminine archetype, but actually they can go bypass that part and start working on, how do I mother myself? How do I become attuned to self and take care of that wounded child who didn't get what they needed?
It so depends on the person and their beliefs and what fits for them. Because I'm going to say, for me personally, I believe that we always have to be part of the equation, our wounded self, our child self. Um, Otherwise, I think that would be spiritual bypassing, I'm going to say.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we see that too in the community, in the same way that traditional Christian, practices, we see people with the divine feminine or goddess who have not done their healing. They still have that hole from the mother wound and haven't addressed it, but they're kind of like have a pseudo practice, a pseudo faith, and that it's just like a band-aid over the wound. It's not really, they've not done the work to heal, which I think internalizing that mother is a key to that. Like, actually loving yourself and being compassionate and kind towards yourself is the key to that.
It's just getting people to the place where they feel they're even worth doing that.
Hmm.
Because I know we're going to talk
Yeah.
about practices and, getting people to do self-care practices is like not easy.
No, no. Sometimes it's very difficult. And I do want to like take a moment. We probably should have said more about this at the beginning. The ethical practice of introducing the divine feminine. That, as you said at the beginning, we want to assess where they're at and what feels comfortable to them. And some people have very severe religious abuse in their history. In fact, mother is associated with that. And then some people, like you said, are atheistic and they don't shove it down their throats that there is a divine feminine who wants to take care of you, because that's not going to work. We're working with their own belief system, their own sense of their place in the world and how, in their meaning and purpose. We're not going to try to push something on them that doesn't work.
I just think there's a lot more room for spirituality to be brought into the therapy room when clients are open to it. And since my practice is pretty much that niche,
Hmm.
I know that there's a need for it. When people find it, they're like, oh, wow, this is great. I can really just talk freely about my spirituality with someone who's open about it.
So, which mother archetypes do you find most accessible and amenable to healing and ritual for people with a mother wound?
The Earth Mother, Mother Nature is one that is accessible for a lot of people, particularly people that don't consider themselves religious or spiritual at all. That is something most everyone can connect with as something awe-inspiring and nurturing and
Hmm.
also destructive, which is that other side of the divine feminine that we're not focusing on today, but gentle Mother Earth.
Yeah.
I love, the mother goddesses, of course. We talk about those in circle, and we talk about all the different aspects of the divine mother or the goddess, but the divine mother. I think of as, I mean, there's Gaia, of course, in Greek, and Pachamama in the Incan tradition, South America. One of my favorites, as I mentioned before, is Kuan Yin from the Chinese.
Hmm.
Sara is sort of another counterpart there because she's Tibetan. So those two have some similarities, but they're a little different. Kuan Yin being compassion and mercy, and Tara also being a mother goddess. I
Hmm.
think of her as more enlightenment oriented. And then with the Yoruba religion coming out of Africa, we have Yamaya. And I know she's one of my favorites too. She's a mother of the oceans and a very maternal goddess.
The Marys.
Of course, yeah, I knew I was blanking on an obvious one. In the Christian tradition, Mother Mary is often a little reduced to
Hmm.
just a mother of Jesus, just the mother. And so, as I say that, it's like, oh, it's just the mother of Jesus, only the mother of the Son of God. But I think for me anyway, she's like a badass because if an angel comes to you and tells you that you're going to give birth to the Son of God, I mean, I think that's going to throw you into initiation process.
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
haven't given her enough credit for the strong mother, I think, that she is. So I
Hmm.
just throw that in there too. And there's a lot of room to build on the Christian tradition of the Divine Mother through the Mary Magdalene and the Mary tradition there.
This is another podcast, but I just read something comparing Iana and her guess. I can't ever say her sister's name, but she was the goddess of the underworld, and it starts with an E. Anyway, and
Rishkiko, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that they're similar to the Black Madonna being associated with the earth and shadow self and nature, and Iana is associated with Mary, who is the uh, goddess of light and air. And I thought that was fascinating. Anyway, we could go, I mean, you know how it is. We could go on forever about all these, the ancient archetypes, the ancient goddesses,
Mhm.
um, are kind of the foundation of almost every faith that we have. They've just kind of been pushed aside for the more male oriented practices and figures in the same stories, like God and Jesus supersede Mary, but where would Jesus be without Mary,
Right, and then that reminds me of the Egyptian goddesses that predate the Mary tradition, Isis being the magical mother, the one uh, that brought Osiris back to life in the same way Mary was witness to Christ's resurrection. And then we have Hathor, who predates Isis. She was such a beautiful, sensual, joyful fertility mother goddess. So look her up um, for some good Egyptian goddess energy as well. So those
Mhm.
are all, there's just so many, but those are some primary ones, I think.
What practices do you think could help in integrating the mother archetype? Like, are there specific interventions that are more amenable to this work? And how would you bring that into those modalities?
I personally use parts work, like internal systems work. And I also combine that with constellations work, which I also do. And I'm using it in a little bit different format than the traditional family constellations, although I do that, but I call it spiritual resourcing. And so I do a lot of spiritual resourcing with these divine feminine archetypes and resourcing
Mhm.
with the wounded parts of as we start to identify those.
So, assessing what those wounded parts need and bringing in the divine feminine imagery and attributions, right? Like, so this is a nurturing mother archetype we're going to use, and how would she take care of this wounded part of yours? What does a wounded part need from this mother, right? Because it might be easier to substitute a divine feminine imagery rather than trying to bring in the mom who was actually the source of pain for the child, for the wounded part. And then eventually maybe we could bring mom into that in a constellation. And I know you and I have done some really great work around my own mother wound and brought in my grandmother. And it was very powerful healing to have my grandmother provide to my mom, to me to witness my grandmother loving my mother and accepting her in a way I'd never actually seen. Like, I suddenly got that my mom had this wound, my mom had this hole, even though my grandmother was there and doing stuff with us and family gatherings, etc. My grandmother favored me over my mom, and so I got a perspective that that was what was going on, and I got to see my mom, what she would look like if she had that love and that healing from being seen and accepted by her mother for the first time. And then she could pass that on to me. Like, our lineage was healed, our relationships were strengthened, even though they're both passed on. And I know you can do constellations with family members who aren't passed on. And we've brought in my daughters into constellations too, so they could participate in this healing. But I mean, when I say we bring them in, it's just you and I, but the constellation is in the field of our minds, and we can see and interact with it um, in a way like guided imagery, you know, and it's very healing.
Yeah, and that work definitely goes into the shamanic. You know what I mean? It goes into the
Hmm.
soul level work that I believe we are still doing, even if we're not calling it that per se in the therapy room when
Hmm.
we are helping people reclaim parts of their self or soul,
Yes,
whatever you.
yes. And I know you can bring in some of those stories, like the story of, is it Isis helped Osiris put himself back together again? Or did she put him back together again? I can't remember.
You found all of the his dismembered parts and put him back together. And yeah, that's a really powerful myth. And just kind of bringing that back in. That's how she was able to bring Horus into the world, which would be the equivalent of Jesus. So Isis was kind of the equivalent to Mary in that mythological story, where Osiris was murdered in the same way Christ was crucified, but he was dismembered, and then she went and put him back together and created a phallus so that they could have the divine king, the next divine king, which was Horus.
What else? Like mantras or affirmations that reinforce that embodied felt sense?
I will come up with those in the session. Like if we've done a piece of work, like a guided meditation, it could be parts work, it could be constellations work, whatever we're doing, I will usually help them come up with an affirmation or mantra. I also call them healing words. That's a
Mm-hmm.
patient term. Like it doesn't matter what we call it, but those are different things we can call it. To what I say is this is to help you really crystallize what happened here today, and for you to continue to say this to yourself, whatever it is. I am safe. I am held. My ancestors are with me. Tara is with me. Mother Mary is with me, whatever it is that really does it for them.
Again, just kind of assessing from them what works and what doesn't work, right? Because we want it to like be an instinctive thing, right? Not just like I'm going to come up with a mantra because my therapist wants me to, and it. But what actually works? Like, what can you say to yourself to crystallize what we've learned here, and to remind yourself that you are loved and held and seen? Because that's what you needed when you were a child, and you still need it, no matter how tough you are.
That's a really good point because it has to be embodied. And that's why I want to catch them in the moment that they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
and say, okay, does this feel true? I am safe in this moment. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if that doesn't resonate, we come up with something else, so they
Speak to me some more about rituals that they could do, and I know that creating an altar. I mean, creating an altar. I had no idea. When I was a kid, I was just like, "Oh, that's what Catholics do." Like, I just didn't know how old the altar is and how far back it's gone, and all the multiple uses. Like we just had Day of the Dead and last month, and realizing that people for centuries have put images or symbols of their ancestors and family, actually even bones at times, to honor them and to recognize, to remind themselves of what their ancestors have done and how far they've come, even ancestors that we may not appreciate. Which some of this work helps us heal that, right? Like I said, we can see our ancestors in a different light when we do this work. How do we use the altar?
I will sometimes suggest for clients that are into this idea and open to it to make an altar to their work with their wounded parts. And so they might put a picture of themselves as a child. They might want to put a symbol of whatever archetype they are working with, symbols, different things that feel supportive to parts of them, and so that they can take a moment whenever they pass by that altar, or if they want to sit at that altar and meditate and do some of these self-love practices or receiving of the Divine Mother practices, they can do it at this altar and also be seeing themselves. I think the altar just is another symbol to strengthen the connection. It's a ways to I think do an altar, but it can be super simple too, just like a few
Yeah.
things to just remind you of that this is a part of you that you're tending to now in a different way
Hmm.
than you have.
Yeah, it's a very behaviorally sound intervention that we ask clients to have something external to remind them of the new focus because we're so wired. The wiring has been there for a long time, and it's going to be automatic where you feel down, you feel lonely, you feel unloved because of childhood issues. You may not say that in the moment, but you just carry that with you. And so when you start doing this work, the external reminders, like an altar, are there to help you remember that's not the way I am anymore. Like I am evolving and moving past that.
Yes. I love just building the altar as a ritual for me, cleaning it, moving things around, maybe rotating some things. That's kind of a nice thing to do if you're going to keep it up for a while. But yeah, making an altar to your inner child, building an altar to the Divine Mother, and depending on how far you want to go with these practices, lighting candles for her, putting offerings on the altar to her, and practicing receiving from her as well. That's just kind
Mhm.
of the old pagan way, right? Of honoring the gods and goddesses and the higher energies that we want to stay connected to for our own well-being.
Mhm.
I was thinking of other rituals suggesting to people who are busy and maybe incorporating some things into their routines, like bathing, taking ritual baths,
Mhm.
taking time to send yourself loving, nurturing thoughts. I'll tell people, like, talk to yourself like you would, like a sweet nurturing mother would talk to you, or
Mhm.
grandmother. Sometimes grandmother is an easier place for people to go.
Mhm. Sometimes, yeah.
So whatever works, and just sort of like talk to yourself and nurture yourself as you're putting on body lotion, as you're making yourself a meal, and kind of infusing that that type of energy into just a day-to-day task.
Again, kind of something a nurturing mother would do, right? What about what usually gets in the way of a client being able to internalize? We kind of talked about this a little bit, but like we alluded to the protector part who might not, that part's there. And sometimes it's the inner critic telling us how not to try, not to be open, to be wary of connection, right? And so, how do we get that protector part to soften and be more receptive?
We work with that resistance. We keep assisting the client in establishing an identity outside of that protector, because that protector may be all they know. So to ask them to give that up is too much. So we have to, it's kind of like building the place up first where we're going to go,
Hmm.
which I call the adult self, authentic self, true self, whatever works
Hmm.
with
I
it.
like unconditioned self.
I like
Yeah.
that unconditioned self.
Yeah.
We're parting ourselves out so that we can build the part that is not the defense, and we soften the defense when we bring in more of that person's true essence. And that may take a little while to get there.
There is a guided meditation that I use from Sarah Payton where we ask the inner critic questions. So it could be the protector part, whatever word you use for it. Like, are you tired of
Mm.
gatekeeping? Are you frustrated with the always having to be the vigilant one? And then we um, attend to a more vulnerable part that probably doesn't, that feels judged by the protector for being weak, right? And we attend to that part.
Mhm.
And it's a very powerful guided exercise because we give that protector the chance to be vulnerable and say, yeah, I am tired, right?
Mhm.
Because it usually doesn't want to be vulnerable, but When you're actually attuned to it the way a mother would be to the child, then it gives it the chance to feel seen and heard. And maybe it will start softening a little bit.
That sounds like a really good exercise. And I find just the power of presencing with those parts
Hmm.
is huge. Like the
Yeah.
softening, like you said, just even being seen, just sitting with another empathic, compassionate human and being seen in their defenses and it not being judged. Yeah. And then like you said, start asking, getting curious is good.
I had an awesome experience with a client the other day I asked her, how does your wounded child feel about your parenting? Because she's very critical of her own parenting, but compared to her mother, it's like she's giving her children things she was never given herself, you know? So I wanted her to appreciate how much she was able to give when she had not been given resources. And I said, how does your wounded child feel about your parenting? And she said, oh, I'm a rock star. I was like, yeah, you are. So, yeah, presencing, giving those parts a voice, and then when necessary, giving them that mother presence that they can, at the very least, model. Oh, I can be as nurturing as Mary was. I can be as accepting as this goddess, or that I can be as protective, right, as I need to be. You put a link of YouTube, the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse.
That is a resource to be read to. I find reading, hearing stories read aloud, nurturing childhood memory, whether you got that from your parents or not. But I think that's one that uh,
Hmm.
I really like a lot for adults to just let themselves be read to, like a children's story, but it's actually a really poignant story if you haven't heard it.
Hmm. I haven't heard it. I'm looking forward to it. I'll put that in the links too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, just kind of creating a ritual of attunement and parenting yourself in a way that you wish you had when you were a child.
It opens up that pathway of receiving when you give it to yourself and you put this time aside to do it for yourself. Um, and I do have to really say this a lot to clients that you have to do it a lot and it might go on for quite a while that maybe you are needing to hear bedtime stories or you have a stuffed animal. I'm a fan of the weighted ones,
Hmm.
where you're holding that and that just it's like it opens that heart center, it just starts the flow. That stuffed animal kind of simulates the baby.
Yeah. And there's a lot of evidence showing that these things, regulate the nervous system and help us to calm the default mode network, which comes about as a result of attunement, or Peyton calls it a savage default mode network if we didn't have attunement. So, like, it becomes that inner critic that attacks us. But the evidence is there. Like everything we're talking about, no matter how woo woo it sounds, is rooted in it's kind of the convergence of the science and the myth, the science and the I don't know, the spiritual, um, that gives us that little bit of extra oomph in our therapy practice and helping our clients.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was thinking about Carl Jung and his work with archetypes and how what you said earlier too about how there's this surgence or resurgence because we have had 5,000 years of a male dominated culture. And so the female archetypes have been less visible. And so this returning back to these ancient, and they're still
Mhm.
in our consciousness. And that's what Jung talked about, is like using these archetypes to become whole, become whole
Yeah,
once again. Yeah.
love that. I think that's a great way to end it because we've really referenced the parts and how we're working with these parts and bringing in the divine feminine. And the goal is to be whole. And it takes a while. It's not a one and done. Like you said, sometimes people will have to re-nurture, nurture themselves over and over again to get to that place. But that's part of our job is to be with them on that journey. Is there anything that you feel like we didn't address, or maybe we could do a whole nother podcast to address it? We did cover a lot.
I feel like we did. I mean, I think as therapists, I guess I would say that, and I've been certainly guilty of this, is, learning a lot of new information for the sake of our clients. And don't forget to apply it to yourself. Use some of this stuff yourself so you can really speak from the embodied experience of it. I just encourage people to not just assign it or
Yeah,
put in something for your client, use it for you. Because it'll
it
be very.
has so much more power, right? When you've experienced it yourself. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Sharla.